Let's turn in our Bibles today to Genesis. We're going to be focusing on chapter 34. We're looking at the stories in the Torah, Genesis through Deuteronomy. We're watching the social roles and moral rules fleshed out in real life so that we can see the context in which God then gave the rules of Torah. Law makes a lot more sense when you understand the case, the stories, the experiences behind it. We are approaching the books of Torah, especially Genesis, from the standpoint of what I call a regressive devolutionary worldview, not a progressive evolutionary worldview. Progressive evolution says they were cavemen, we're smarter, that was archaic, we're way past that, we've got it more together than they do. I'd like to suggest we'll never get it more together than the Word of God. And that we go back to the Word of God because it's closer to the original. We may have advanced technologically, but we've crashed and burned morally and socially. And so we're looking back with value at these ancient laws of God. We're seeing God's laws as simply intrinsic reality, not imposed restrictions, simply describing how life works on a sustainable level. I don't care how sustainable we try to be in our current society, you cannot sustain life under sin and selfishness. It eventually winds down. It's only as we move back to God's way of doing things that we can actually enter into life that lasts forever and that's worth lasting forever. So the bottom line we're asking as we go through these stories and rules is, do we really trust that God and His ways will bring us life? Or do we feel that if somehow we come under the rules of God, we're going to have life taken away, we're going to be restricted, all we can do is sit in church and sing another hymn and hear another sermon, and that's kind of the idea of heaven, is the eternal church service. And those who believe that you go to heaven when you die kind of have this idea that they're sitting up there, all is peace and light, but the action's really happening back down on earth. No. Do we actually believe that God's ways will bring us the fullest life, or do we believe that we'll find the fullest life by living out however we're feeling? And that's the fundamental question that we have in a world today that says, live out whatever you're feeling. That's the only way you'll find life, because you live, you're born, you live, you die, that's it. And God says, no, you're made for much more than this. All right. We've been going through the story of Jacob. I want to very quickly set the chronology again. Jacob and Esau were born when Isaac was 60. Esau married when Isaac was 100, when he was 40. How old was Jacob when Esau got married? Same age. They're twins, okay? All right. I've asked that question several weeks in a row. You're only starting to catch on. We know that Joseph was made ruler in Egypt at age 30. We know that 9 years later, he was revealed to his brothers and moved his father to Egypt. And his father said at that point to Pharaoh, I'm 130 years old. So we can synchronize Joseph's life with Jacob's, such that we know that Jacob was 91 when Joseph was born. We know that Joseph was born in the 14th year of serving Laban, which means 7 years prior to that, Jacob got married to Leah and Rachel. Remember, Jacob is the heel grabber. Jacob is the conniver. Jacob is the one who's 30 seconds behind, and his whole life is based on trying to get 30 seconds ahead. And he is willing to do whatever it takes. Now, God said the older will serve the younger, but he didn't trust God to bring it to pass. And so he starts conniving and cutting hard deals when his brother's hungry, and then just flat out lying to and deceiving his father and stealing the blessing. For which he gets his brother's wrath that says, I'm going to kill him. And the man Esau knew how to kill. He was a hunter. Jacob knew that he was done. So he flees for his life. He's won the blessing by deceit, but he flees for his life. And on the way, God meets him at Bethel and says, by the way, I'm with you. If I was God, I would not have been with Jacob after that. But God says, I'm with you. In spite of our foibles and our control trips, he says, I'm with you. And so Jacob goes up and he serves Laban, and he meets his match there because Laban is also a conniver. So after working 7 years for Rachel, he wakes up with Leah. Well, it's our custom here to not give the younger until we've given the older. So work another 7 years, I'll give you Rachel. So within a week, he had 2 wives. And another 7 years indebtedness. At the end of which, Joseph is born in that last year. Backing on up, then, we know that he left home at about age 77, when his father was 137, and went to work for Laban. Get the point? We've said it before. Jacob is a classic failure to launch. He is still at home with Mama in the kitchen doing what she says at age 77, where his brother's been married for 37 years and probably has kids and grandkids, a household and a family. So when Isaac wants to bless one of them to be the family leader, the tribe chief, the head honcho of the family, who's he going to bless? The one that's still in the kitchen or the one that actually knows how to go out and procure food for the family? And even though God said the older will serve the younger, I think even Isaac was saying, Jacob can't lead anything but a pot of stew. I'm going to put Esau in charge. Well, that's contrary to what God said, right? So then Rebekah hears it and gets her son Jacob to go deceive his dad, and Jacob gets the blessing by fraud. And when Esau comes in and says, he's stolen my blessing, he's Jacobed me twice. That's what the word Jacob means. He's Jacobed me twice. When I sold the birthright when I was hungry, he drove a hard bargain, and now he just plain deceived me. Isaac said, the younger has been blessed and he will be blessed. It's almost like Isaac said, I give to the will of God. It didn't happen the way God wanted, but God said the older will serve the younger. And no matter how much conniving we manage to do, there are certain things that God says are going to happen that are going to happen. It's interesting how free will and sovereignty fit together. So with that timeline in mind, Jacob spends 20 years with Laban, 7 working for his wife, got both of them, worked another 7, and then 6 years for wages. All right? Then, at the end of that 6 years, he decides he wants to go back home. Good old Jacob, instead of actually telling Laban, his father-in-law, that he's going to be leaving now and taking the family and moving south, he waits till Laban is out of town, and he splits in the dead of night, so to speak, and gets 7 days' journey south before Laban catches up. And Laban is ready to do damage, and God says, don't touch him. And they make peace there at Mizpah. Now, just to get the context of things, backing up to when Jacob got married, it's important to have some kind of an idea of how these children of 4 different wives interplay in their ages. We did this once before. I've got a little different approach now. So we get Jacob and married to Leah and Rachel at the same time, sometime in his 84th year, which begins the next 7 years of working for the wives. Now, Leah gets pregnant right away. So we're going to let her get pregnant, by the way, and then he works 6 years for wages, of which I put 3 on the screen. Leah got pregnant right away and had 4 sons, one after the other. So if we ever get pregnant on the honeymoon, before the end of the first year of marriage, Reuben is born, and we'll put about 1 a year after that. That's about as fast as it's going to happen. All right? During this time, of course, Rachel fails to conceive. So at some point, she decides to have Bilhah join the team, her maid, to try to win the game in the baby wars. And let's just suppose, we don't know when, but I doubt if she waited 4 or 5 years. You know, she tells Jacob, give me children or I die. And Jacob says, who am I, God? I'm doing what I can. So she adds Bilhah onto the team. And let's just put that probably after a couple of years. And if they get pregnant on the honeymoon, Dan is born in another one. So probably Dan and Naphtali are similar in age to the older 4 sons. Now, it says that after Judah was born, Leah failed to conceive. So, 3-4 months, she should be pregnant again, right? That's the way it's been going. So you get down to about 6 months and she's not pregnant. Maybe it was a year or 2, but let's just go with only 6 months. And she decides to have Zilpah join the team. And let's suggest they got pregnant on the honeymoon. And Gad and Asher are born within the next 2 years. Now, at some point, we have the story that Reuben went out in the field and found some mandrakes and brought them in. They were supposed to be an aphrodisiac. And it's clear that Jacob's favorite wife was Rachel. That's where he spent his nights, because when Rachel wants a mandrake, Leah says, fine, but I get him tonight. And so when Jacob comes home from the field, Leah says, I hired you for the night. You're sleeping with me. And she gets pregnant. Now let's do this as early as we can. She fails to conceive for 6 months or so. She brings Zilpah on the team. And not too long after the mandrake thing happens, we got to compress this as much as possible. It may have taken longer, but there's a problem with that. So she gets pregnant, and Issachar is born 9 months later, and then Zebulun will make that a year later, and then Dinah will go a year later. And that's the end of Leah's bearing of children. Meanwhile, we know that Rachel finally gets pregnant and has Joseph at the end of the 7th year of working for the wives. So Dinah must be at least a year younger than Joseph. But they're similar in age. Now this gets very important, because as we go on down through the story, we're going to switch now to starting with the birth of Joseph and those 6 years of working for wages. If we go on down through the story, we know that Dinah is born, and then we know that Jacob flees at the end of the 6 years. He wrestles with God, and he reconciles with Esau. I'll come back to that in a minute. Then the next absolute we know is that Joseph is sold when he's 17 years old, so we can put that on the timeline of Jacob's life at 108. All right? We know that after he reconciles with Esau, he spends some time in Succoth, which means booths. He built booths and built a house, the Bible says, for himself. So he must have stayed there a few years. And then he moved on down to Shechem, where he was for a while. And that's where we get to the story we're going to talk about today in detail. That's where Dinah was raped by Shechem, the son of Hamor, the tribal chief. Then we know that when he moved south from Shechem, Benjamin was born and Rachel dies. A very sad moment for Jacob. He lost his sweetheart. We also know that shortly thereafter, Reuben went in and had sex with Bilhah, one of his wives. And then we know that Joseph was sold. Now, the reason I've clustered all those way down towards the end is because we've got to get Dinah old enough to get raped. I know that sounds backwards to say that, but this wasn't a case of pedophilia. This was a case of Shechem getting the hots for a sexually mature young lady. And by squeezing Dinah's birth as far early as we can, and squeezing the rape as late as we can before Joseph is sold, we still only have her 14 years old. There's just not a lot of time there. Now, they would arrange marriages back then when you were 6 or 7 years old. It doesn't mean you got married and moved in together. It means, mom and dad got together with this mom and dad and said, we think our kids would make a great pair. The bride price was paid, and she was taken before she'd ever had a boyfriend. You see? So that when they mature, then the wedding will happen, but she is already given. She's betrothed. So for Dinah to have reached puberty, catch the eye of Shechem, have him move on her sexually, and then want to marry her, she's got to be about 14 or 15. And there really isn't any more time than that. So that's kind of why we've done the timeline the way we have. And that is important as we go into our story today. Before we hit the story of Dinah, though, I want to ask a question. Remember back when Jacob had his pivotal moment in life, and that's when he wrestles with God. This is as we've talked about, a moment of supreme stress for Jacob. He has been manipulating and managing his life by hook or by crook, by deceit or by hard bargain or whatever he had to do. He has managed to pull things together to the point where he now has a large family and a whole entourage of servants and flocks and herds. He's become a community, a town. And he's moving south from Haran to back towards Canaan. And after he reconciles with Laban and Laban heads north, Jacob sends emissaries ahead to tell Esau, I'm coming. Now, 20 years before when he left, Esau said, I'm going to kill you. Now Jacob recognizes God said, go south, go down, I will take care of you. Remember, the angels met him. God affirmed that he was with him, just as he did at Bethel on his way north. He did it now on his way south. And yet, when Jacob sends emissaries down south to Esau to say, I'm coming, I hope I'll find favor in your eyes, the emissaries return and say, Esau is coming to meet you, and he has a cavalry of 400 with him. And Jacob knows he's about to be annihilated. There is no reason for Jacob to believe anything but that a massacre is about to happen. And now it's not just him. His conniving, his deceit now has his entire family at risk. You leave a legacy when you deceive and connive. And so we know that Jacob divides his family into two groups, hoping one over the hill will not be seen while the other one gets massacred. At least he'll have half of them, or half will survive. And he sends those droves of flocks and herds ahead as gifts to Esau to try to appease him. Then finally, when he knows it's going to happen the next day, he divides his family by the 4 wives, the 2 servants' wives and their kids, and Leah and her kids, and Rachel and her 1 kid, Joseph. And he decides he's going to put them in order so that when Esau comes, talk about playing favorites. Okay, Bilhah and her family get wiped out, and then Zilpah and her kids, and then Leah, and maybe Rachel will survive. He's kind of ranking the kids by value. Right? And he sends them across the river. Put a little space between them. A little bit of safety, the river. And he hasn't crossed over yet. And it's dark. And it's the night before he's going to meet Esau. And he is stressed to the max. And then somebody puts their hand on his shoulder. And he goes into fight mode. Now, who showed up? It wasn't Esau, it was God. And you may have thought of this 100 times already. You're going to go, duh, on this. But why did God show up? Did God show up to fight? If God himself shows up, you're in deep doo-doo, right? If he doesn't bother to send an angel or just an impression, you're in big trouble. Or you're really important. But everybody's important to God. I remember hearing a pastor of one of these mega churches tell the story that he was standing at the door after one of the services, and some lady came by and said, I was in the hospital and you didn't come and see me. Well, he said, did some of the elders come? And she said, yes, but you didn't come. He said, ma'am, you don't want to be sick enough for me to come. Now, the point is, if you pastor a church of 10,000 people, one person isn't going to be able to make all the hospital visits, right? Much less a senior pastor with everything else. And so you delegate. But there's this mindset, unless the pastor showed up, nobody showed up, you see. And But the idea is if the senior pastor shows up in that megachurch situation, you got to be one of the extreme cases. And a suggestion here that God shows up because this truly is a crisis moment for Jacob. Jacob is his man. Jacob is the progenitor of the nation Israel to come. Joseph is the one Jacob is the one through whose seed all the world will be blessed. And he is at an overwhelming stress point. His blood pressure is probably through the roof, and he's about to have a stroke. Remember, he's almost 100 years old. And God shows up. What does God show up to do? To scare him? To argue with him? To fight with him? Or to console, comfort, strengthen, and give him the courage? This is almost like the night in the lion's den. How is Jacob going to sleep knowing Esau is coming tomorrow? And I think God came to give him the strength to let him know, I have your back. You're my man. You're a mess, but you're my man. And to calm him down, to get his blood pressure down, to keep him from having a stroke. To maybe have him be able to get a little sleep. But when God shows up, what do we generally do? When God shows up, we generally resist. We generally fight. We're so afraid if we don't have our way, we somehow will miss something. Elijah goes to the mountain, running away from Jezebel. And when God shows up, he first thinks God shows up as the wind and the fire and the earthquake. But when God shows up, it's not that. It's the sound of the gentle stillness. God really prefers to speak quietly. He has a very big voice, but he knows how to use his inside voice. And he prefers that to his outside voice. Sometimes he shows up and thunders and roars on Mount Sinai because he has to impress us that he's actually big enough to handle the job. But when it comes to personal support, he likes to show up quietly. But God has a real problem. You see, if you had a vacant lot that you wanted to build a house on, but there was an anthill in the middle of it, and you loved those ants, how would you manage to get the ants to be led away to safety before you bulldoze the lot? You go and you try to talk to those ants, even if you spoke their language. All you're going to do is scare them half to death, right? You're big and they're small. Right? And no matter how nice and how kind and how gently you try to talk to those ants, you're just scary. God is kind of scary, right? But he's trying to lead us to safety. He gives us a lot of stories. He tells us, he shows us who he is and that he does care for us. He's not just here to stomp on us and squash us. That his ways really are right. But often his ways mean you have to leave the comfort of your anthill and all the comforts of home that you've created there in the dirt and follow him off to some unknown place that you've never been before, where it doesn't look very friendly over there, and you feel like the one who's trying to save you is actually trying to deprive you. And so what do the ants do when the human being gets too close to the anthill? They bite. Right? And God shows up and Jacob bites. God didn't come to scare Jacob. God came to give him courage and help and hope. And Jacob fights all night. until near dawn. He realizes he can't best this person, but the person hasn't bested him either. And suddenly with a touch, his hip is out of joint, and he is incapacitated. And he knows it wasn't from a hard blow. He knows all of a sudden he is fighting somebody who could have wiped him out in an instant. And now he hangs on. He simply hangs on, and he says, I'm not letting go. And I've suggested in previous weeks, and I'll say it once more, often God has to wound us and incapacitate us so we can't fight anymore before we're willing to stop the struggle and simply ask for the blessing. And Jacob clings is the word. It's the same word, I believe, there as man shall leave his father and mother and cling to his woman, Genesis 2:24. Jacob clings to God and says, I won't let you go until you bless me. And when the encounter was over, Jacob led the way to meet Esau, limping on his crutch. Jacob now steps out in front of the family. He goes out to meet his doom from his brother and the 400 with him, totally unable to defend himself at all. Finally, he cannot connive, he cannot strive, he can't do anything but just limp forward and trust the Lord. And that's when God changes Esau's heart. And what should have been a massacre is a reconciliation. From there, as we've said, Jacob spends some time in Succoth, letting his flocks and herds and family recuperate. If he built houses and booths, he spent at least a season there, you would think, a year, maybe longer. Then he moved on south to Shechem. You have a period of 8 to 10 years there. And when he gets down to Shechem, we're at chapter 34. Dinah, chapter 1, the daughter of Leah, about a year younger probably than Joseph, just barely into her mid-teens at best, went out to see the daughters of the land. She went to the mall. She went for tea. She went to hang out with the girls, the local girls. Nothing wrong with that. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, prince of the country, saw her, he took her and lay with her and violated her. Shechem is the son of the tribal chief. So Shechem is a relatively powerful young man. He certainly would be the catch, right? So Shechem sees this new young lady in town. It says he saw her. We guys are very visually oriented, right? I like that, right? That's why men have such a larger issue of pornography than women do. You women go more to the romance novels and men go more to the pornography. You know, romance novels is just female pornography. You just read about it and paint your own pictures in your mind. We guys have to have the pictures taken for us. But both are escapes because of the emptiness in our own lives. Shechem sees. There's something about you ladies that attracts us men all of our lives. You know, it's kind of interesting. The models of cars have to keep changing to keep our attention, right? And, if we're doing drugs, we have to have a bigger drug, a bigger hit. Things have to get bigger and change and get more radical. But, nothing much has changed about you women in the last couple thousand years, but you still have our eye. God did an amazing thing when He made women. The crowning act of creation. It gets better all the way down to Adam, and then there's Eve. Wow. Nothing wrong with Shechem seeing Dinah. In fact, you ladies like to be seen. Right? I've come to appreciate in a special way over the last few years that, we guys, we dress up however, but when you ladies walk into the room, there's always an addition of color and flair that is good. It is good. Christianity has taken those verses on don't make your adornment the outward of clothing, jewelry, and hair, but focus on the inward. And we've taken that to the point where we've kind of decided that a good Christian woman is supposed to be plain, busy, and tired. But God made you to shine. And you know that deep down in your hearts you want to be the beauty. There's something in there. And that's not bad. Under sin and selfishness, that can become an all-consuming, I got to shine better than the next one. You women, you really dress for each other more than you dress for us men. And it can become what you see on TV when I walk into the room where they see the splendor of me. Very narcissistic, very self-centered. That's not healthy. But it's also not healthy to just think you're supposed to be plain and black and white. God made you to be beautiful. And it's not wrong to seek to reveal that beauty in appropriate ways and for us to see you. See doesn't mean lecherously. I'm sure that when Dinah walked into town and noticed she caught the eye of Shechem, that probably was kind of exciting, right? This is probably her first sensing of sexuality and beauty and being a young woman. And she walks into town with the other young ladies and she notices the chief's son isn't looking at them, he's looking at her. It says he saw her and he took her. Now the word take there is the same word used for he took a woman, for meaning he took her as wife. This clearly doesn't mean his wife at this point. But very clearly, when Shechem walked up to the group of young ladies, he engaged Dinah. Dinah must have been better looking than her mother. Remember? Because Jacob didn't want Leah because she had the weak eyes and she wasn't as pretty as Rachel. But she evidently had a knockout daughter. He saw her. He took her. He took to her at least, right? He wanted to go out with her. He said, why don't we, ditch these other gals and let's go to the park together. You and me. I want to take you to my house. Show you things. But then it says he took her and he lay with her. Which means he had sex with her. There's an interesting part of this phrase. It's not absolutely conclusive in its biblical use, but in most cases where you're dealing with consensual sex, it will use a specific preposition, im, which means with. When a few years later, Potiphar's wife said to Joseph, "Come, lay with me," it uses the with preposition. Now, there's another way of having the with in the Hebrew. There's a little word that's a marker for the object of the preposition. But it seems that when it's consensual sex, most of the time they'll say, "lay with me." He lay with her. It uses the with pronoun, im. You recall there was a young lady named Tamar, not the Tamar of 2 chapters later, but the Tamar who was a daughter of David, King David. I believe it's 2 Samuel about chapter 13. Tamar had a half-brother, Amnon, who got the hots for her. He was so stricken with her that he was sick and in bed. We men can be very imbalanced sometimes. And he feigned to be sick and said, "Oh, could Tamar come and make some food in my sight and feed me?" Okay, so she came down to help her brother. And when she went to feed him, he said to everyone else to leave the room. And it says, he said to her, "Lie with me." It uses the preposition with. And she said, "No, my brother. This is a disgrace. This is wrong." And it says, instead, he overpowered her and lay with her, but the word with is missing. He overpowered her and he laid her. Now you have the concept of not mutual consensual, but of one overwhelming the other. Maybe not with a knife to the throat. Maybe not with the threat of "I'll kill you." But definitely a power position where the woman is either incapable or afraid to exit. Now you have the same thing here when it says that he lay with her. The preposition is missing. He saw her, he took her, he laid her, he defiled her. The word violated is anah in the Hebrew, and it's the same word for the Egyptians enslaved the Israelites and afflicted them. It's the same word for Sarah afflicted Hagar and she ran away. It's also the same word where God says, "Return to Sarah and submit to her." It's a word that means to respond. And if you respond willingly, that's one thing. If you are forcefully responded, that's rape and violation. Okay? So Shechem saw and acted on his own lust and desire. You know, we as young men have a real hard time telling the difference between lust, desire, and love, desire, don't we? We have a hard time with that one. It says in verse 3, his soul was strongly attracted to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and he loved the young woman and spoke kindly to the young woman. He got things kind of backwards. Nothing new for young men. He got things kind of backwards. Thinking with the wrong end of the body. He let his passion run away ahead of his wooing. But he still wanted her. And so you'll notice he didn't love her and leave her like Amnon did to Tamar. But now he tries to backtrack and speak kindly to her and draw her in from the heart level. You ought to start with the heart and then move to the body, not go to the body and then try to grab the heart. But he cares for her. And Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, "Get this young woman to me as wife." And Jacob heard that he had defiled Dinah his daughter. Now his sons were with the livestock in the field, so Jacob held his peace till day came. Jacob is kind of a wimp. He doesn't really stand up for things. And Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him. And the sons of Jacob came in from the field, and they heard it. And the men were grieved and very angry, because he had done a disgraceful thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, a thing which ought not to be done. Notice there's a very clear sense of moral sexual integrity here. Even though the young man is out of line, it's very clear that in these societies there was a strong sense of sexuality only within marriage, and that when you were sexually involved, you were involved at a much deeper level of responsibility to care for that person. Hamor spoke with him, saying, "The soul of my son Shechem," verse 8, "longs for your daughter. Please give her to him as woman, as wife. Marry our daughters, and we'll marry your daughters, and we'll dwell together, and we'll become one big happy family." That's what he says. And Shechem said to her father and her brothers, "Let me find favor in your eyes, and whatever you say to me I will give. Ask me so much dowry and gift, I'll give according to whatever you say, but give me the young woman as wife." Shechem comes back and he says, "I love your daughter. I will do anything you ask to have her as my wife." Now, at first we didn't like Shechem, right? He's a little out of line, way out of line. But it's interesting now. Shechem is trying to be responsible. He's trying to come back around and put things right. The sons of Jacob answered Shechem and Hamor his father, and spoke deceitfully. They'd learned well from their father, right? Mr. Deceiver. Spoke deceitfully because they defiled their sister. He had defiled their sister. And they said, "We can't do such a thing to give our sister to an uncircumcised person. You all have to become circumcised if we're going to let you have her. And then if you all get circumcised, we'll become one big happy family." Verse 18, the words pleased Hamor and Shechem. I can't imagine how those words would please anybody. It definitely shows you the lengths to which Hamor was willing to go and Shechem was willing to go to make things right with this situation, and that he loved the girl. So they went without delay, and the next few verses says they got all the men of the city together, and they said, "Wow, they did a little bit of politicking here. If we'll just all get circumcised, we can have their daughters as our wives and give our daughters to them, and in the long run, all of their wealth and all that they have will become ours. We'll become one big happy family." And it says at the end of verse 24, every male was circumcised, all who went out of the gate of the city. And it came to pass on the third day. I skipped through something here in my paraphrasing. Look at verse 19. The young man did not delay to do the thing because he delighted in Jacob's daughter. He was more honorable than all the household of his father. I find it very interesting that Shechem is spoken of as honorable. When you've done a dishonorable thing, it's good to do an honorable thing from there, right? I mean, in our sexually promiscuous age, young men impregnate young women, they violate them, they take their virginity, and they just move on. If kids are born, they may send a little money, they may not, they let the government take care of, they don't even think about actually being responsible for what they have set in motion sexually. We've created a safety net that lets men not have to be men. We can just be bulls in the barnyard and studs on the range. This young man absolutely did a horrendous evil to Dinah. And yet it says he was honorable. Why? He took the responsibility for what he had done and was willing to go to whatever lengths necessary to put things back in order and move on with Dinah well cared for. And the third day, when they were all in pain, the second and third sons of Jacob, both full brothers of Dinah, Simeon and Levi, took their sword, came upon the city, and killed all the males, including Hamor and Shechem, and they rescued Dinah from Shechem's house. Evidently, the marriage deal was cut, literally cut. The marriage deal was set, and Dinah went to his house. And these two brothers rescued her at the edge of the sword, plundered the city. The rest of the sons joined in. They took all the flocks and herds. They took all the other women and children. What'd they do with them? Now, we don't have that answer, right? Made them servants in their household. I mean, what a mess. And notice Jacob's response. Verse 30. You've troubled me by making me obnoxious among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanites, the Perizzites, and since I am few in number, they will gather themselves together against me and kill me. I shall be destroyed and my household with. But they said, should he treat our sister like a harlot? Who was more righteous in this story? Shechem or the brothers? Now, this is the problem, see. We're just to the point of making some points and we're out of time. If you read the laws in Torah concerning sexual morality, and we've looked at these before, so I won't take time now, but I want to just draw a couple conclusions quick. If a young man takes a young woman's virginity, he is immediately responsible to care for her for the rest of her life. And he has to pay the bride price, and having paid the bride price, Dad can still say, you can't have her, I'm keeping her. And we look at that and we say how barbaric. Didn't women have any rights? But the thing I see here is, number one, sexuality and responsibility are always together. And number two, please show me any way in which our current system is better. We simply have sexuality with irresponsibility, which means homes fall apart, which means society falls apart. And when the homes fall apart, fifth commandment, we do not honor our father and mother. It deals with the family unit. You will not last long in the land which the Lord your God gives. I admit, when I look back at some of these laws and stories in the Old Testament, they stretch my thinking. But you know, sin doesn't work. God can't even make enough laws to make sin work. All God can do is say, in the middle of the mess, if you'll work my way, it'll be better, less mess, than if you try to make it up as you go. And when I look at some of these stories, I realize that this is not utopia. This is not women having all the respect that's due them. This is not men acting all the ways that they should. But given sinful selfishness and our desire for control and our lack of self-control, God lays out some rules that aren't perfect, but they're a whole sight better than our progressive ways. That's why I still say, we look back at these, and if we will try to look at them through the eyes of what God is trying to accomplish, we'll see that his ways are so much higher and so much better than ours. And we'll pick it up next week. Let's pray. Jesus, I would pray that you would impress us of the weight, of the seriousness of our own sexuality, and that the responsibility goes with it. Let us, as your people, act responsibly within our marriages, outside of our marriages, before our marriages, as we're young people dating and looking for a partner. May we be willing to say, Lord, I believe that your ways are the best ways. And though I don't always understand them, and though they don't always fit with how I feel, would you please let me live out in this mess your ways, knowing that that is the best in the current situation and will ultimately lead to life. May we surrender to you, as Jacob finally did when he stopped striving and clung to you. And may we receive, therefore, your blessing, we pray in your name. Amen.